Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 351 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels coming to you from Sandusky, Ohio. Long time no talk. So glad to be back with you. I've been in a bit of a funk in recent weeks, and as you know, I'm a school teacher, and our school year began a couple of weeks ago, and I worked all through our summer months. I've already lamented and complained and whined a little bit about this in a previous episode, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I've just had a difficult time in the last few weeks finding the focus that I've needed to want to do the next episode of the podcast. I've had one thing here or there that's always gotten in the way of sitting down to do it. Um, and I was talking with my students today. We were talking about John Locke and some of his writings where he talked about, the ideas of life, liberty, and property, that people had those natural rights. Then we discussed how Thomas Jefferson, the third U.S. president, the writer of the Declaration of Independence, borrowed from John Locke and in the Declaration talked about the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I asked my students about what are their pursuits, what makes them happy. Of course, they're teenagers, some of them sleeping, hanging out with their friends, athletics, reading. There were a couple, which was awesome. Video games, of course. And one of them had the keen insight to ask me, well, what makes you happy? And and I didn't mention this in class, but the first one would have been seeing my kids being successful and happy would certainly be at the top of my list. But the response that I gave them was doing this exact thing that I'm doing right here, this podcast, and sharing my take on the game and sitting down to talk with awesome guests, sharing their stories, sharing their love for this game as well. And it kind of sparked me to realize that, you know what? Get off your ass, okay? And go do what it is that you love. Okay. And I love doing this and I love sharing the game with you. So glad to be back. I've not been on talking about the finals at all so far this year, nor the AFLW. In fact, I've not even watched any AFLW this year, which I'm a little frustrated by. But I have watched a little bit of cricket. I did watch the first two T20 matchups with England and Australia. I have not watched the third one from their visit to England yet, but we'll see what happens there. So I'm glad that you're listening. Now, today's club of the episode, they are the Morningside Panthers from the QAFL up in Queensland. And the club was founded way back in 1950, but they didn't qualify for their first finals appearance until 1967, 17 years later. Actually, I guess technically it might have been 1966, depending on how you do the math. Now, this past weekend, the club defeated Redland Victoria Point at the Michael Voss Oval 66 to 61 to win the QAFL Premiership. And one of the reasons why I decided to make them the club of the episode is full disclosure, and many of you know this if you've been listening to the podcast for a while. My favorite player from the AFL, the reason I became a supporter of this club right here, the Geelong Cats, Nakia Cockatoo, plays for the Panthers. Okay. And he's still a young man. He's 25 years old, I believe. He might be 26 now, but he's the same age as Sean Manna, who was drafted by the Cats this year. This year, he played 18 games for the Panthers, kicked 35 goals, and he was named to the QAFL's Team of the Year, along with his teammates Garrett McDonough and Tommy Horn. So I want to congratulate the Panthers and especially Nakia Cockatoo for winning the QAFL Premiership. And Mr. Cockatoo, you're probably not listening, but if you are or a friend of yours is, I absolutely would love to have you on the podcast as a guest, sir. Um, you're the reason I'm a Geelong Cat supporter, and I thank you for that. And by the way, your button is right there over my left ear. So the semifinals are in the books. We've got the prelims coming up here in just a couple of days. An early Friday morning game with Sydney and Port Adelaide, and a 3:15 a.m. first bounce for the Cats and Brisbane. And before you ask, yes, I will be up for that one. I'll get to bed early on Friday evening, and I'll get myself up at about 2:45, make some coffee, and I have to announce a football game later that day as well. So I will definitely be up for the game. Now, hopefully I won't fall asleep. And again, 2022, I'd had an extraordinarily long day. I fell asleep about 5 minutes into the first quarter of the grand final with the Swans and had to go back and rewatch the first quarter before I could continue watching the game. I'll tell you what, I still feel guilty about that. Okay, I feel like a terrible supporter, but I'm getting old, so I occasionally realize that yeah, you're getting old. You sometimes are going to fall asleep, but caffeine is still our friend. So um, I got to ask the question, and again, I've only been following the game since 2016, but was this the best semifinal round in AFL history? I'm not going to, I guess you could ask VFL, you could ask Sandful, Waffle, etc. I'm not going to know about all of those, but yeah, I look back through like the previous 8 or 10 years, and maybe not quite 10 years, but like the previous eight. Um, GWS beats Brisbane 83-81 in 2019. The Bulldogs nipped the Lions 79-78 in 2021. Carlton knocked off Melbourne 73-71 last year, to name a few. But going back those years, we didn't have a pair of games that were as awesome as these two were, in my opinion. Okay. Port's win over Hawthorn and Brisbane's absolute fourth quarter demolition of GWS sure seemed to me like they were probably the best pair of semifinals we've had in a quite a number of years. And if you got other ones, I'd love to hear from you on that. So drop me a note, let me know which ones you think were better. Um, but just, Hawthorn, it it could have been you. Had a couple kicks that went awry late in the game. James Sicily hit the post. Um, God, what a story! And now people are already, tipping them to be the premiership favorites for next year. And I don't know if I can be so bold as to say that's what's going to happen, but as a Cat supporter, I know I'm not supposed to say this, but it looks like Hawthorn might just be back. But we have to keep in mind Hawthorn's going to probably play, at least on paper, a slightly more difficult schedule or fixture next year, having finished in the top eight. So their double ups might be a little bit more difficult for them. So maybe that brings them back to the pack a little bit, but I just think that they're going to have enough talent. They're probably going to be back in the eight next year as well. Now, the whole Ginnivan and Kenny Hinckley tete-a-tete brouhaha at the end of the game, I've only seen it after the fact. That game ended within like the first 3 minutes of my first period class last Friday, or I think it was Friday, yeah. So I had the game actually on. I had the sound turned down as the game was wrapping up, and the kids were kind of into it. The announcements were going on. We did the Pledge of Allegiance, the announcements were on, and kids were kind of into it. Like I said, it only took like 3 minutes of the first part of the class. Game ended. At that point in time, I shut it off. So I didn't see firsthand the incident between Kenny Hinckley and Jack Ginnivan. Now, I understand that those kinds of things are going to happen because if you've looked at an old post I've got up on Facebook when I got my Geelong license plates on my car. In fact, my Ohio plates here in the United States, that's my tag name, Geelong. I have Geelong plates on my car, um, my personalized license plate. But I have a sticker of Chris Scott from a few years ago at the game up at the Gabba with Brisbane where I don't even remember the specifics, but he's down on the ground between quarters, and he's giving a rather skeptical or quizzical or frustrated look to the Lions. And somebody turned that into a sticker on Redbubble, and I just had to have that to put on my van. So I do have that. So I understand when coaches get angry. But you know what we got to keep in mind? Jack Ginnivan's not even 22 years old yet. Now, I know that means that he's been in the league for several years. He's played the game at the highest point. He's played on the biggest stage. He's won a premiership with Collingwood. He's a character, okay? He's a character. He's somebody who's going to draw attention to the game. Okay, he's somebody who's going to maybe get young fans interested in the game. I know that old crotchety, grumpy people like me might look at it with disdain, like Kenny Hinckley, but I have to kind of go back to the Warren Oates line from the movie Stripes, where the one character they're sitting around talking with one another, and he keeps telling everybody, "If you look at me, I'm gonna kill you. If you touch my stuff, I'm gonna kill you. You do this, I'm gonna kill you." And he's trying to come off sounding like a badass. And Warren Oates, who's the drill instructor, just goes, "Lighten up, Francis." Kind of sounds a little like Warren Oates there. I guess lighten up, Kenny Hinckley. You were kind of the guy that was getting all fired up about that. Jack Edelman had some fun. Yeah, it bit him in the ass. His team lost. Guess what? He's going home. You're going on. Enjoy it. Now the fine. I don't know, man. I don't get the fine on that. Um, you know, I, as you may know, I announce high school football at my school, and we played the team that I announced for at my school. We're the top ranked team in the state of Ohio in our division. There are 7 different divisions. We're in Division 4, which is the one in the middle, and it's based upon student population in your school. And right now, we're the number one team. We're considered the best team in the state. And last weekend, we had the number 3 team in Division 5, a slightly smaller school, that came to play us. And damn, were they a good football team. We were leading 28-22 with about a minute and a half left in the game. And we'd gotten the ball down to the 21-yard line, if you follow any gridiron, and it had gotten to be a 4th down and I believe 16 yards to go. So we'd lost a few yards. We were trying to eat up some of the clock as well to keep them from getting the ball back. We were going to attempt to kick a field goal, which was going to be worth 3 points, which would put us up 9 points, which they would then have to score they would have to score twice in order to beat us in about a minute and a half. Not an easy thing to do. Um, well, we set up to kick the field goal, and one of their players jumps off sides. So they move us 5 yards closer. The same player we set up for another field goal now at 31 yards. We're 5 yards closer. He jumps off sides again. So the officials move us up even closer. So it's now a 4th down and 6 from the 11-yard line. So we're close to the goal line. So while we're getting lined up again, that player, and I'm watching it happen because I'm up in the press box. I can see down there. The player is off kind of by himself. He's angry with himself, as anybody would be. Okay, anybody would be angry if they had committed 2 penalties that did this sort of thing. And he said something that caused the official to throw a penalty flag for unsportsmanlike conduct, which is at that point in time where we were, it's normally a 15-yard penalty, but it's half the distance to the goal. So like 5.5 yards plus an automatic 1st down. So we get the ball back again with a 1st down, which meant that we could snap the ball and take a knee 3 times and run out the clock. And we won the game without having to actually do anything else again. So the ball was not in jeopardy for them to get it from us to try to score again. So it was great to get the win, but it was really a crappy way to win a game. I went and spoke to their coach after the game, after he had spoken to his players, and they were heading to their locker room. I told him it was and I don't typically do this. It was an absolute pleasure to announce his team. They played the game the right way. They hit hard. They were tenacious. They played the game well. I even talked to the young man who committed the penalties, and I told him, I said, I don't know what you said, but from what I could see, you did not direct it at any of the umpires. You were frustrated with yourself, and you said something, I think, that the umpire did not like. And I said, it's too bad that happened because it took the outcome of the game out of the hands of the players on the field. Now, I heard from one of our coaches later on that he dropped an F-bomb, which was kind of funny because that coach, who's a teacher in our district, we could have ended World War II significantly more quickly if we were able to carpet bomb Germany with all of the F-bombs that he drops. You know who I'm talking about. He doesn't listen to the podcast, but I'll make sure he listens to that section. But you know who I'm talking about, you. Um, and if any of my students happen to listen to it, they certainly know who I'm talking about as well. But it was just a shame that the game ended that way. Like I said, I'm glad we won. They've got some very talented players and looks like some very humble kids, and he was just frustrated. Um, but I we've seen things like this happening. We saw, Jack Ginnivan, is he a star player right now? I don't think he's a star yet, but he's certainly well known. But go back to the game the previous weekend at the Adelaide Oval when Jerry McCameron kicked a goal right over near the fence. And I believe something must have been said from one of the fans in the stands, and he turned around and pointed at a fan, and people have made memes that this guy looks like a Simpsons character. I don't know, but Jeremy Cameron looks like he gave it right back to him. Now Jeremy Cameron is a star, but I don't know if I would call him a character necessarily. So the simple fact that in that instance that the fans are so close to the field. I mean, they're literally right there. Okay, they're right there. You're gonna, and maybe you have sledged on players from other clubs. I see it all the time when it happens. I see, the affection between players and supporters of their own club, as well. Do I think Jack Inman was being disrespectful? No, I don't think so. I think he was just talking a little bit of smack. We get a lot of disrespectful behavior that takes place in sport here in the United States, but we're not alone. I mean, sure, it happens in Australia as well, but it just becomes bulletin board material, and it makes you want to go out and beat that team. So, if nothing else, I think that this makes that Port Adelaide win that much more tasty for the Power because of that. They handled things on the field. Okay. Now, this kind of thing takes a life of its own on, though. Think back to what we had happening late last year when GWS was on a little bit of a run. And at the start of this year, I mean, GWS's social media team, and I know I posted something about this on X. I think they've got the best social media team in the comp. They have, they are not afraid to poke fun. They're not afraid to get right up there, push the envelope right up to the edge of the desk, if you want to use that desk analogy there, but not necessarily push it over the edge. Um, but think back to the beginning of the year when the Magpies actually had to leave the MCG. See, I know how to sledge too, and go play a road game out of state. I know. Well, they only play road games out of state because they can't go to that cow paddock down in Geelong, right, Nick? Um, and Mason Cox, my fellow American, well, now you're Aussie, Mason Cox, commented on the NG Stadium, I believe it's called now. And the grounds there and just what it was like, and it was a bit of a cow paddock. And the social media group with GWS had a little bit of fun with it. And the best part for them was, if I'm not mistaken, they actually won the game too. So it makes the victory even that much more sweet. So Port Adelaide, Kenny Hinkley, just enjoy the fact that you won the fucking game, and don't, sure, Jack Ginnivan said something maybe you didn't appreciate. Okay. You can go talk to him later on. I'm sure your media people can get his cell phone number, and you can give him a call, and you can talk to it man to man, him man to man. Now, again, I'm not, and I didn't see it. I've only read about it. So I'm not saying that what Jack Ginnivan did was right. And I'm not necessarily saying that what Kenny Hinkley did was wrong. But I know a lot of people are giving him a hard time about this and saying, well, he's a grizzled veteran coach. He's been coaching a long time. He should know better than that. Well, you know what? You're also treating these 22-year-old young men as full-grown adults who have all of their faculties as well. So if you're going to hold Hinkley accountable, I guess then you would have to hold Ginnivan accountable for it. And that's exactly what Hinkley did. And it cost him 20 grand. So it's water under the bridge. We're over the bridge. The Power's going on. The Hawks are on their way to Bali or wherever they're going for their break. And it is what it is. Now, I got to tell you, I'm extraordinarily impressed by the Hawks bounce back this year. They were really frustrating early. If you go back to my season preview episode, I was so tempted to put the Hawks in the top 8, and then they had a couple of injuries in their defensive structure right as the season was starting, and it scared me off from doing it. And I'm kind of kicking myself for it because, very impressive. And I know some people are thinking they were already going to be premiership favorites. I don't know if I'm quite ready to crown them with that yet, but I have a feeling they're going to be pretty darn good next year. Um, but they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I'm going to do an episode a little bit later on who I think next year's or next year's Hawthorn could be. And it might be surprising for some people because I think a lot of the pieces are there. Okay, I think a lot of pieces are there. But if we go back and we look at what the four clubs that are playing in the prelims this weekend have done, they have all had significant hiccups this year. They have all had episodes during the season where we as footy fans have thought to ourselves, does this club have what it takes? Okay. You go back, Port Adelaide, they hammered Sydney back in round 21. They beat them by, 18 and a half goals. I don't see that happening again. Um, we're going to get into the, looking at that. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into that before we do this as well. Like I said, all four of them had hiccups. Port Adelaide, they lost 4 out of 6 games between rounds 12 and 18. The Cats lost 6 out of 7 between rounds 8 and 15. Now, if I remember correctly, they had like 5 of those losses were by very few points. They got their asses kicked by Gold Coast up in Darwin. They had an 8-point loss, a 6-point loss, a 4-point loss. Um, so there were some close ones there. Then they got thumped a couple times pretty bad by Sydney. They got thumped by the Blues as well. Um, but we go back and we look at some of these other clubs. The Sydney dropped 5 out of 6 between round 16 and 21. So they've had the most recent hiccup. They've kind of raided the ship as of late, though. And Hawthorn, started out really poorly this year. And Brisbane started almost as bad as they did, losing 5 out of their first 7. I mean, go ahead and raise your hand if you thought after the first third of the season, Brisbane's cooked. There's no way they're playing finals. And you go back and you look at the ladder in like round 14, 15. They're still not in the 8, and they just kept shooting right up the ladder and finished in the top. They got up there, and you can't do anything but tip your cap to them. I mean, all four of these clubs have stabilized. But like I said, Port Adelaide, they thumped Sydney back in round 21. 18 and a half goals, actually a little more than that. I don't see that happening this weekend. And I'll be honest, I don't know where Port Adelaide's going to get their points. I really don't. Okay. Is Charlie Dixon coming back into the side? I think he would have to. Whether he's got any gas left in the tank or not, Todd Marshall, I think, is going to be out due to concussion protocol. And he's been a little gun shy and a little tentative. And again, I remember last year, I believe I tipped him to win the Coleman Award. That turned out pretty well for me, didn't it? But if Dixon plays, if he can turn back the clock, that's great. But if he doesn't, Sydney's really got to keep, Willie Rioli and Mitch Georgiades under wraps. And I think they're back in the grand final. I do. I just, again, I hope Port Adelaide finds a way to win because I think that the Power are a better matchup for the club that I'm going to tip to win the other game. Hint, hint, hint. Um, but it is what it is. I do think that Sydney is going to win this week. Okay. And I've got Sydney winning this one by 11 points this week. Okay. I've got them winning by 11 points. And, the Cats, they play Brisbane, and I tipped Brisbane to win the grand final. And yeah, I guess I'd love to have the satisfaction of knowing that I got my grand final prediction right, but not at the expense of my own team. Okay. And, my mate, Mick Aussie, who I got on for most of the season. And Mick, I want to apologize to you, sir, because as I kind of lost my focus and I lost I don't want to say my drive. I think focus was probably the biggest part. I mean, I kind of fell off being in touch with you about getting you on the podcast, and I want to offer you my sincere apologies for that. Um, but I only got 4 out of the 8 finalist clubs correct. Mick got 5 out of the 8. I put his Crows in the 8. I had Fremantle in there. I think I had St. Kilda in there as well. I think I had St. Kilda finishing top 4 this year, if I'm not mistaken. Well, that kind of didn't happen. Um, but the Cats are well rested. The injury front, they're pretty healthy. Toby Conway's not going to be back because of his foot. Gary Rowan, with a fractured skull. I did see an image of him with his staples in his head. That didn't look like it's going to be very comfortable. But as the rumor goes, chicks dig the scars, I guess. but I have a feeling he's going to keep a full head of hair his entire life now. But yeah, I keep hearing that there are rumblings that the Cats may be thinking about bringing Tom Hawkins back into the side for the prelim. You know, as much as him playing in the prelim and hopefully getting to a grand final would be a storybook capstone of his career, I got to tell you, I've been so relieved and pleased with how well Shannon Neal has performed in his stead. Okay. And I just think that right now Shannon Neal might be the better option alongside Jeremy Cameron up forward. I really do. And I hate to say that because Tom Hawkins has been so much fun to watch. Um, but I just think Shannon Neal's a better option right now, but I'm not making the decision there. Okay. So again, I'm tipping the Cats to win by 13. Um, Now, I did see an article today that I was reading on Code Sports, written by Scott Gullen from the Herald Sun, and it's titled "Coaching Lifestyle: The Ingredients Behind Geelong's Sustained Excellence." And there was a quote, and it breaks down the different aspects. It gets into coaching, it gets into the culture, it gets into um, recruiting, the intangibles, development of players, and there's a line there from Chris Scott, who is quoted as saying his famous quote where he says, we're in it to win it every year. Fuck everyone else. You know what? You, you can't help but don your cap and tip your cap to somebody who has that attitude because they're not saying rebuild, they're saying reload. Okay. And they've done that. And I was able to hop on and ask a couple questions at the tail end of Chris Pepper's most recent episode of Lace Out podcast. And I asked, and this may anger a lot of you, I said, and this was a real question I asked. I said, are the supporters of the other 8 clubs in Victoria, I don't remember if I used the word jealous or envious, but either one of them works. Let's go with jealous of the Cats' success over the last basically 15, 16 years. Well, they're in the finals almost every single year. They weren't last year. They're all in the prelims almost every single year. I mean, it's wash, rinse, repeat. They're back there again. And they keep figuring out how to do it by plugging in, new players. And I'm looking at, the list that they have right now. You look at, the father sons that they have on the list, there's 2. And one of them is going to be gone. You got Tom Hawkins, you got Jed Buse. You're some of the players that they've got in their top 22, if you will. Um, and none of them were picked higher than number 19. Okay. None of them were picked higher than number 19. DeConing was picked at 19. Mitch Duncan and Max Holmes at number 28 and number 20. Cola Jasny at 41. Sean Mann at number 36. Gry Myers, number 57 in the draft. How many clubs are going, son of a bitch, how did we miss on him? A distributor like that. Shannon Neal at 33. Tom Stewart at pick 40. Again, another one like, where did that go? And think back to last trade period when Asava Radaglia finally said, get me the hell out of Geelong. I want to go to Port Adelaide and play a prelim in Sydney. And they accommodated. But they held out for a pick that people said, what are they doing? Why are they holding out for that pick? Turned out that was pick 63. And it was Lawson Humphreys, who has come in and done a yeoman's effort plugging a hole in this club. And I think he's somebody that's like you're going to see him there for probably the next decade, unless he decides he wants to go back out west. But again, here's another player, not unlike Tim Kelly, who was drafted much higher, who's been playing out west for a considerable amount of time, if I'm not mistaken, and neither Fremantle nor West Coast, and decided to take a look at him. And let's be honest, West Coast, you could have used some damn players. You can't tell me this guy wouldn't have been helpful on your list. We got him at pick 63 because the Cats held out for that pick and said, we want that one also. And Port said, well, we really want Radaglia, so we'll go ahead and give that one up. So I applaud the Cats recruiting office for doing that. I mean, you got one delisted free agent on there. He turned out to be an All-Australian, Tyson Stengel. and a couple players that have come in via trade. Jeremy Cameron, Patty Dangerfield. They gave up a lot to get those guys. Reese Stanley came in as a trade. Tanner Bruin, Jack Bowes. That Jack Bowes trade. Yeah, I know that was a bit of a hinky one there. We gave up a lower draft pick and got a higher draft pick plus a player back because Gold Coast is trying to clear cap space. Um, you got to love when that happens. I know I mentioned that in an episode, the podcast a couple of years ago when that trade did occur, that the Cleveland Browns did that sort of thing with the Denver Broncos, where the Broncos traded them a second round draft pick, which turned out to be Nick Chubb, and a quarterback who they had paid way too much money for, which the Browns know all about now with Deshaun Watson, for a fourth round pick because the Broncos wanted to get it out of underneath that salary cap money. So, I loved this article, and if you get the Herald Sun or if you got Code Sports, I strongly encourage you to read that one because it was really really an interesting read, and again, I love seeing the depth of that sort of thing because again, I'm on the periphery, I'm on the outside looking in at this sort of thing. Now, before I wrap up tonight, okay, I did want to let you know I've been this has been one of the things that's kind of been frustrating me. Okay, I've got, and I'm not going to zoom in on it too much, but if you're on YouTube, you can see it here. I'm just going to flash it real quick. I've been making a list of. I went through all 405 episodes of the podcast, um, and I wanted to come up with my dozen. I'm not going to say they were my favorite guests, and don't get me wrong, I loved having them on. There's not a guest that I have had on the podcast that I have said after the interview is done, son of a gun, why did I bother talking to that person? I have never done that, okay, and I never will because I'm so curious about the stories that people have to tell. But I've got 405 episodes, and a good 60% of those are interviews that I've done. Maybe not 60%, 50%, maybe half. Okay. So you've got 200 interviews out there. I went through and pulled out and made a list of what I thought were my 12 most interesting guests. And I'm going to go through and highlight all of those guests, like four guests at a time, and then do a re-release of each of those interviews. Okay. So there's gonna be 12 of those. Um, and that's going to take me, a couple of months. I still want to do more of the um, your favorite game episodes where a guest comes on to talk about the most memorable game that you've ever attended, that you were part of, that you saw in person. I had gentleman who's a Tiger supporter on last year or the year before. I remember him telling me the story that he was supposed to go to the season opener for the Tigers, and they had track and field day at school, and he got hit in the head with a discus and ended up in the hospital doing a Gary Rowan imitation. Uh, right, Peter? Um, but there are some of them are former players. Let's see, one, two, three, four of them are former players. I think. Let me count again here. One, two, three, four. I thought I had five on there that are former. Maybe I only have two, four, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I thought I had another one down there that was I've got one I'm going to be making an adjustment on because I have it's either four or five former players, but the rest of them are just everyday people. They're everyday people who share their love of the game. And some of them I've had on the podcast more than once. Some of them I've only spoken to once, and I had not spoken to them since then. But the stories they told I thought were so unique. And that's one of the things I love doing is being able to tell the stories of these people who are footy fans. And inside is that kernel of footy talking about the game and that we all love. But then I love to peel that back a little bit and see what else makes those people tick. What are their lives like? What is it that they love? What is it that got them to the point where they were able to love their footy club or love that aspect of their game, if you will. Okay. So I'm going to be bringing those to you here very soon. And again, there are, that's one of the things I love about doing the interviews is that I still engage with online more people that live in Australia than I do that live in the United States. Hands down. Hands down. If you exclude my wife and kids and my mom, um, and my sister, I mean, that's about all that I've got some nieces and nephews as well, nieces and a nephew, nephews, by marriage also. But, I don't talk to them a whole heck of a lot online, but I talk to people in Australia every day, every day. And I am eternally grateful for the friendship that so many of you have provided me. Um, I'm not somebody that I'm not somebody that is a going out and sitting at the bar and shooting the shit with people kind of person, that sort of thing. I don't do that kind of stuff. I'm a bit more of a homebody. So this avenue of being able to share this game that I love with people and have you share your take on the game with me that you love is just awesome. And like I said, I'm eternally grateful to you for that. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, look out for one another. Check up on your friends. Make sure they're okay. If you need to talk to somebody, those numbers are in at the show notes of every single episode of the podcast. Please talk to somebody. The world is a much, much better place with you here. All right. Remember, you can find everything related to the podcast over at my website, ayankonthefooty.com. I do hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll get on the mailing list. I hope you'll give me a follow over there on Twitter at yank_on. Follow the podcast on Instagram, on Facebook as well. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. If you want to reach me by email, ayankonthefooty@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And that when you get on that mailing list, when new episodes come out, and they're going to be coming more frequently now, okay? I'm done feeling sorry for myself. I'm done, wasting time. Uh, I'm back. I hadn't gone anywhere, but I just hadn't done an episode for a while. Um, but if you got an idea for a guest, I love talking to former players that played the game. I love people who are fans of the game who want to share their most memorable game or their unique story. Please reach out. Drop me a note on my website, ayankonthefooty.com. Drop me an email at ayankonthefooty@gmail.com. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Please leave a review for the podcast as well. Head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review there, or head over to my website and leave a review there. You can leave one right on the website as well. That'd be a huge help, folks. Um, really love doing the podcast, and I just needed to get a couple things off my chest along with this one and kind of confess to what's been going on here. So I truly appreciate each one, every one of you listening. And as always, may your dribble kick never hit the post. I will catch you later. And this has been episode 351. Please share the podcast with your friends and family. And until next time, cheers and goodbye.